The mindset shift here is that we are adding good stress deliberately. It's a choice because we want to create growth.
Did you know that stress isn't always a bad thing? Depending on the type and application of stress, the effect can change drastically. And today's guest, Dr. Sharon Bergquist, is here to change the way we think about stress and how it may actually help us live longer. We've heard a million different things on how stress can affect us, but this is a true paradox. She's here to discuss her new book, The Stress Paradox: Why You Need to Stress to Live Longer, Healthier, and Happier. And she'll reveal how we can alter the way we think about stress to reduce chronic disease, lower our biological age, which we all love, and adopt new healthy habits. Welcome, Dr. Bergquist.
Welcome. We're very happy to have you today.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure being here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, listen, we'll dive right into it. I mean, listen, first of all, we kind of want to understand the stress paradox because we've heard for years and years, we associate stress with as a negative connotation. Stress can lead, if we talk about mitochondrial stress in our cells, we look at cellular breakdown. If we talk about environmental stresses, we look at genetic abnormalities and chips in our DNA. Your book introduces the idea that stress isn't always harmful. Can you kind of break this paradox down for us?
Yeah, so it's extremely counterintuitive because for 90 years since the inception of the concept of stress, we have been told how stress harms, and it does. I mean, there's so much medical literature. We've done studies on the harms of stress, but there's also very new science, the science of hormesis, on how stress benefits us. So like you just mentioned, so much in our environment and even the aging process itself is harming our cells. It is causing damage to our DNA. It's causing damage to mitochondria, and various different components of our cells. Hormesis, or good stress, helps us repair and regenerate our cells. So in our modern world, we're out of balance. We're getting so much harm day to day. There are about 10,000 injuries to our DNA alone. So that's 7 times a minute. And our body has innate ability to repair so much of the damage that we're incurring. But in order to activate our innate ability to keep our cells healthy, to slow the aging process and defend against disease, we've got to be willing to get into a realm of discomfort.
Sure.
Your research focuses on hormetic stress, just like you talked about right now. And you explained this to us somewhat, but how does it really differ from chronic stress, and why is it beneficial to us? Because, everything you're saying makes me feel good because we're really stressed out individuals. We've done surgical residencies and plastic surgery residencies, and in a lot of ways, that stress has been one of the impetus. They've been a part of our life, and it's what pushes us to be better and to kind of keep doing what we're doing. But yeah, how does it differ from that chronic stress that people live with?
The chronic stress that our bodies aren't designed to live with or adapt to are continuous stressors. So things like financial hardship, things like bad relationships, and these are ongoing, everyday chronic stress. And the type that our bodies are adapted and the type that makes us thrive are brief, intermittent stressors. And like you just said, the whole residency process, a lot of medical practice, there's so much that is stressful to us, but the kind that is harmful tends to be unpredictable, it's uncontrollable. And the kind that helps us thrive, that builds our energy, is usually stress that's a choice. And it's one that's aligned with what matters to us. It's meaningful. That type of stress releases a completely different biochemical profile. So when you are doing what you love, when you're doing surgery, you are making people beautiful, you are adding so much to their life, that's rewarding. And the biochemistry of that stress response is far more nuanced than just cortisol or norepinephrine or epinephrine, these stress hormones. You're also releasing dopamine, which is the reward hormone. You're releasing oxytocin, the cuddle hormone, because there's a component that's generative and bonding with humanity. You're also releasing serotonin, the happy hormone. And that combination, that trifecta, actually counteracts the effect of cortisol. So not all stress is actually harmful. And we can actually use these good motivating stressors to counteract the damage that we're getting from the harmful stress. I mean, that's the paradox, right? We need stress to build stress resilience.
Sure. And, it's interesting. I just wanted to highlight the fact that you said that we are essentially, the good stressors are balancing the bad stressor, which stimulates cortisol production. That's your fight or flight. Cortisol is produced, can last for 8 to 12 hours, and destroys all kinds of things in our body, especially when it's in excess. You talk about the 5 good stressors, and it's interesting because, we see such an increase in the usage of some of these stressors, especially in Los Angeles. Everybody loves trying to be as healthy as we possibly can. And so talk about the 5 good stressors that you focus on in your book.
They're fascinating, actually.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, some of these stressors people have heard a lot, and probably a lot of listeners are already practicing some of them. So they're phytochemicals, which are working like plant toxins in our body, high intensity interval training, fasting, intermittent fasting in a circadian pattern, heat and cold, which has gotten a lot of recent attention, and good emotional and mental challenges. And the common thread between all of those stressors is that they're hormetic, which is from this Greek word hormesis, or to excite. These are the stressors that benefit us. And what they share in common is that these are the stressors that our ancestors adapted to over the last 2 million years. And it's really only been in the last 2 to 3 centuries that our lifestyles have just radically changed. And as we've developed more industrialization, computers, we have removed these natural stressors from the fabric of our life. And our genome has actually adapted to needing these stressors to activate our healing capability. And when we are stealthily, these have kind of crept out of our life, when we aren't activating these defenses, we are tilting the scale towards disease, and the lack of these good stressors is contributing to so much of the mental and physical illnesses that we're seeing skyrocket.
Now, just to make it dive into them a little bit deeper, like for example, the plant-based protective toxins. How can certain foods actually make us more resilient or stress us in a way that it's better for us? If you can give us some examples. I'm that kind of guy that needs to be, everything has to be spelled out for me.
And it's interesting because, one of our previous podcast guests, Dr. Stephen Gundry, he talks about the plant paradox and how that there are certain plants that are fighting for their lives and they're actually harmful to the body. Are these the same type of foods that we're talking about?
This is a different paradox. So our relationship with plants is incredibly intricate. We've kind of co-evolved throughout our human history. And plants make phytochemicals as a stress response. When they're exposed to drought, to UV light, to insects, to humans, us chomping on them, they make phytochemicals for stress resistance. They're natural pesticides, and they're there to make the plants sturdier, to make them survive their environment. When we as humans consume those plants, they activate our stress responses. And for example, when we consume sulforaphane, which is a phytochemical that is in broccoli, cruciferous vegetables like cabbage, it's in kale, what happens is it activates a master regulator called NRF2, which ramps up our endogenous antioxidant defenses, and it increases our detoxification capability. So historically, we've thought of plants as kind of giving us antioxidants. For example, the thought process is if you eat the colors of the rainbow, you are eating different antioxidants, and that's why you need plants. But the idea behind that is it's in a kind of tit-for-tat way where we're neutralizing our free radicals by consuming these antioxidants. But a big gap in that theory is that we would need like micromolar amounts in order to neutralize. And what we're consuming, it actually gets into our body, is in the nanomolar range. Right? It just doesn't add up to how we benefit from plants.
Sure.
What's come to light is that what's happening from that very small amount is that it's activating our own antioxidant defenses, right? So it's really has so much ramifications of what our body's capable of doing and what we need to support our body's innate capability.
Interesting.
And heading to, kind of one of the next key stressors that you think is good. I mean, obviously, I'm a big proponent. This is intermittent, intense exercise. As a father of 3 little kids, it's tough to make it to the gym every single day, but 3 days a week, I think performing that intense type of exercise really challenges the body. I guess, what would you say the ideal way is to incorporate that into our routine, and what benefits do you see just by, that intermittent, intense exercise?
Yeah, so I kind of with you there. I have 3 children myself, and we're all looking for these really powerful levers that can, give us the maximum amount of benefit in the shortest amount of time. And that's what we're doing with high intensity interval training. One way to think about this is the stronger the stimulus, the more we adapt. So if we create a strong stress stimulus, we're sending the signal to our central nervous system, which then communicates to our body that we need to expand our capacity. And with high intensity interval training, we're doing that in a way that is simply more powerful than moderate intensity. One specific way that high intensity benefits us is at the level of our mitochondria. So exercise is the most powerful way for us to create new mitochondria called mitochondrial biogenesis. And it's also the most powerful way to stimulate mitophagy, which is a selective form of autophagy, where our mitochondria, the parts that are damaged and destroyed, actually turn over. So we're really creating cleaner energy, right? We're making new energy that is creating less pollution in our body. Mm-hmm. So I think we try and look at this from a practical standpoint, like what can we do in our day? One really interesting study is one that was done on vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, the acronym built by the ILPD. And in that study, what they found is that when people do 3 times a day of 1 to 2 minutes of intermittent bursts of vigorous activity, that short amount can reduce mortality from cardiovascular disease by about 50% and reduce all-cause mortality and mortality from cancer by about 40%.
That's insane.
Yeah. So, I think we can all do that, right? Just think of I run up a flight of stairs instead of walking up a flight of stairs. Just simple things like that, just built up throughout the day.
Sure. I think it's just a mentality shift, and it's easy to incorporate, and you can do it throughout your day. The next point, when we talk about extreme temperatures, we have big proponents of, the cold plunge. We have big proponents of sauna, red light therapies. It's interesting. And even Peter Attia talks about it in his book as well, and the benefits of this. Give us your take on this. What are the benefits? How often should we be using these modalities?
So heat and cold are also working in our bodies as a stress, right? So again, this common theme that our body gets exposed to stress, and the way we respond to it is what is creating this cellular repair and regeneration. And to kind of put this all in perspective, we have the stress response that I think people are all familiar with, the fight or flight, which is our alarm system that kind of kicks in seconds.
Sure.
But there's a whole other layer of stress responses that's happening at the level of our cells. And the time scale of the cellular stress responses is over hours to days and even a lifetime through epigenetic changes after the immediate exposure to the stress passes. And so these cellular stress responses, their purpose is to help us adapt. Okay, so they're there to help us, not to harm us.
Sure.
And that applies here in the case of cold. To back to your question, what happens when we're exposed to cold? Our core body temperature goes down. If we're exposed to heat, our core body temperature goes up. And our body is designed to stay at roughly 98.7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the homeostatic temperature. That's where our enzymes work optimally. And if we get in either direction, up or down of our core body temperature, our feedback mechanisms just kick in. Right? We're here to survive, right? So they kick in to get us back to our homeostatic temperature. In that process, we're activating these cellular stress responses. So in that process, we are turning over mitochondria and creating new mitochondria. In that process, we're repairing DNA. We are activating heat shock proteins that also repair our proteins. We are activating sirtuins that have many effects on our body, including improving our level of inflammation, our antioxidant defenses. We have an antioxidant response that is also improving our antioxidant capability. So cold and heat, they've gotten popular. It's almost like a biohack, right? They are very popular among people interested in longevity. But what I hope to bring to the forefront is that these are everyday practices that are really for all of us. They're such an integral part of what our physiology needs for us to be healthy.
Definitely agreed. The feeling after a cold plunge or one of the hot red light saunas. I mean, for the rest of the day, you're definitely feeling great. But
do you like doing them one after another? Because I normally go into a sauna for 30, 45 minutes and then go into the cold plunge. Or is it just, mutually exclusive? How do you think it works best?
So with all of these, it depends what your goals are. If you are interested in the mental resilience component of it, cold in the morning can increase. So one study looked at just cold exposure from cold water immersion. There was a 530% increase in norepinephrine and 250% increase in dopamine. So that short exposure completely energizes, motivates, just makes you feel good. And again, that duration of how good you feel lasts far longer than the exposure to the stress. So shower or cold exposure early in the morning is very advantageous for that. And it creates an environment in your body that is stimulating stress. So if you can stay calm and work your way through it, right? The instinct when you're exposed to cold is get me out of here. But if you can just take deep breaths and stay calm, you are building your ability to handle other stressful situations with greater resilience. And with heat, you'd probably want to do that closer to the evening. I mean, one of the benefits of heat is that it raises your core body temperature, but your body naturally cools off. And we sleep better with better quality and fall asleep faster when our body temperature is lower. So again, there are so many nuances to how you can use things. You can use heat after endurance exercise. And because sauna can mimic vigorous or moderate to vigorous intensity exercise, you prolong the benefits of your endurance workout by doing sauna right after. But you have to be careful with cold therapy. If you do that right after resistance training, you can actually blunt the hypertrophy benefits of the resistance training. So there's a lot of nuance as to how to use each and how to use them. I have a protocol section in the book that helps guide people. And depending on the benefit they want, whether it's metabolic, whether it's mental resilience, how we use these modalities can be different.
And I'm imagining, this is a great segue into the next topic, which is intermittent fasting. I mean, there's so many different ways of doing this. And I know that sometimes it's age-based, there are so many factors that go into this, but, what's the most effective way to do this for health and longevity, in your opinion?
So like you said, there's so many different regimens, and It comes down to what your goals are, just like most things. And the way I see this is that if we want to get the most hormetic or stress-related cellular regeneration, what I would recommend is doing time-restricted eating, which is limiting your calories to a certain time frame within the day. Ideally, at least 12 hours, because that is the time frame where our body switches from using glycogen or glucose to using fats and converting into ketones. And ketones are signaling molecules. They send a signal to other parts of our body to turn on these repair processes. And I recommend that people time their eating window to having most of their calories earlier in the day. So in a circadian alignment to how our body is optimally wired to metabolize our calories. So you get the double benefit of the intermittent fasting and the benefit of strengthening your circadian biology.
It's very interesting because a lot of people will talk about eat your meal at night, then don't eat again till 1 o'clock. But yet, I think a lot of that kind of stuff is shifting as well. Next question I have, I think is to me the most interesting out of the 5 and mental emotional challenges. And when you think about stress, a lot of it is mental and emotional. You really get stressed out mentally or emotionally. And how can we build resilience by intentionally pushing ourselves outside our comfort zone? Because I think that's when men and women get stressed. And that's when, we've been told for years that we get sick due to the stress. The stress caused the cancer. The stress made me break out, or so forth, so on. How can we do this to build the resilience and use the stress as a positive thing? And I know it's not necessarily some of the things you don't want in your life. So we talked about that in the beginning, but stuff outside of our comfort zone.
Yeah. So, some of this goes back to what we said at the very beginning, that the types of stress that are really harmful are the chronic continuous stressors, and the types that are beneficial are brief intermittent stress. And this applies to mental and emotional challenges. So our bodies are actually wired to benefit from short exposures. The same hormone cortisol, which we all call the stress hormone, it can have beneficial as well as harmful effects depending on the amount in our body. When cortisol is present in mild to moderate amounts, it binds to a different receptor in the hippocampus, the learning and memory center of our brain, and in our prefrontal cortex, which is where we make decision making. And at that low level, when the cortisol binds these mineralocorticoid receptors, it strengthens the synapses, the connections between our neurons. When cortisol is present in an excess amount, so either extremely intense stress or a prolonged duration of stress, when that cortisol level is really high, it binds a different receptor in the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, these glucocorticoid receptors. And that has the opposite effect. It actually prunes the connection between our neurons. So if we can get these mild to moderate amounts of stress followed by recovery, right? This is the key, right? It's brief, intermittent, and then followed by recovery. We can create incredible connections in our brain, right? Incredible connections between the synapses. So we have 90 billion neurons, and we can create trillions of connections between these neurons. So if you picture this as like this incredibly intricate network, you're essentially taking your brain from a DSL network to a 5G network.
That's funny.
It's interesting. I wanted to, again, focus on the fact that you had mentioned recovery, because when we talk about good stress and longevity, the idea is that you need a recovery period. So when would you say, how do we find the right balance between stress and recovery? And, what signs should people look for to avoid overdoing it?
Yeah. So one of the most intuitive ways to know if you are in this kind of sweet spot, which is called a hormetic zone, or this Goldilocks zone of what's an optimal amount of stress, is, as you mentioned, we just have to push a little bit past our comfort zone, but we shouldn't feel overwhelmed, and we should still feel safe. right? So that's a really critical piece of it. And in terms of knowing when you are experiencing good stress versus harmful stress, you just have to tune into your body and say, well, how do I feel afterwards, right? If you are energized, motivated, you're more creative, that is good stress. If you are exhausted, fatigued, and you are starting to feel burnt out, that is not good stress.
Right. And
That's
you need to go back to the drawing board and look at what you're actually doing.
Yeah, that's really a great point.
I see there are so many different individuals that use at least one of these 5 on a regular basis. And, you know, the health benefits alone, you can see physically and mentally, so it definitely works. When we look at, everybody loves these biohacks and longevity hacks, and I don't know that they're necessarily hacks. We'll say the idea is, what's one mindset shift that you think people can embrace that can help people embrace stress instead of fearing it? Because when you talk about bringing on some of these stressors, look, when we talk about cold plunges, my heart rate goes up.
Me too.
It's just not an enjoying experience for me, but it is for some people. How do you know when to choose the right one for yourself, or what's one shift, that mindset shift that can help people embrace stress?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because so much of this is mindset. So I'll kind of say 2 things about this. The first is that so much of what we're exposed to in terms of health information is about what we shouldn't do, right? We need to avoid foods. We need to avoid being sedentary. We need to avoid chronic stress. And that creates a mentality of fear, right? Of restriction. And it kind of makes us feel stressed about our health, right? The mindset shift here is that we are adding good stress deliberately. It's a choice, because we want to create growth. We want to create abundance. So it's a completely different mindset, because we are building resilience instead of fearing the harm that can be created in our body. So we're focusing on the part that's in our control versus the part that's not in our control. So I think it's a really important mindset shift. And at the end of the day, what I fundamentally believe is that we are all capable of living better, of feeling better, and expanding our human potential. But we have got to be willing to get uncomfortable in the service of increasing our capability.
Agreed.
The best way to kind of apply some of these things is by examples, right? Like, do you have any personal stories or examples from patients that you've successfully incorporated these practices?
Yeah, patient examples, personal examples. I mean, I'm in internal medicine. I've been practicing for 25 years. And rule number 1 is you've got to practice what you preach. So
Exactly.
So absolutely. I use a blend of all of these. For me, I view the day as starting actually in the evening, because your bedtime routine and how well you sleep sets you up for the day. So I think of the day then as starting in the evening. And I try and end eating after dinner. So usually there's at least a 2 to 3 hour space between my last calorie and bedtime. That reinforces my circadian pattern, helps me sleep better. Usually within an hour before bedtime, I'm dimming the lights, all to help the quality of my sleep. When I wake up, I would love to say I get sunlight, but the reality is it's dark when I have to get to clinic. So I try and get sunlight when I can get it. But I do try and extend the fast. I have usually coffee, which has ferulic acid, one of these phytotoxins that we're talking about. If I'm taking a shower, try it at least a few times a week, get some cold at the end of the shower. And all these things just take you closer and closer to that more resilient, energetic, more capable state. People who haven't done it, like when I look at my patients who are struggling, like I think a lot of people struggle. Again, I'm in internal medicine, and most of my patients are struggling with chronic disease, or they want to age better to be around for their grandchildren. And we see a lot of metabolic disease. I mean, that's just such an integral part of just the state we're in as a country.
Sure.
And most people just feel tired. They just, every day is a struggle. And when I start to implement these with my patients, there's a night and day difference. Like, people come back saying they've never felt this good in their life. This change in their diet, small changes in their exercise pattern. A lot of it is what you just mentioned about the mental and emotional component being so powerful. I think for a lot of people, it's this differentiation of what are the chronic harmful stressors that are just weighing me down. How much am I doing that's not aligned with my core beliefs? Because when we are in this malaligned state, for example, in healthcare, there's so much attention to burnout and kind of moral injury. If we are not aligned, it's essentially like lying to our bodies, right? It's this chronic stress response. And recognizing that and making small shifts to doing things that are aligned, to having that moral clarity, to me, that's really where the mindset and the game changing begins.
Now, 25 years as an internal medicine provider. So when did the light bulb go off, or on, I should say, that conventional medicine's great, but there's a lot more to it that we need to work on to just optimize ourselves? Because we had a fascinating doctor here that we spoke to on our podcast about how, we didn't really get taught anything.
The lies
in
that was taught in medical school.
The lies that were taught in med school, and how so much is being discovered after the fact. And everything you're saying, I think it's everything we should all live by, because it makes us feel better without having to take medicines and a lot of other things. But how long did it take for you to practice before you said, wow, I want to write this book. I want to implement this in my practice. I want to implement this personally. Because again, you and I both know it's much better to try to do things physically, emotionally, and in a more kind of organic way than to take medicines.
Yeah. And, I would say it was pretty early in my career. So, early being like a decade. A lot of what we've learned in residencies, I finished my residency in 2000. So much of residency is outdated. So there's so much interest in, how medical education should change to focus on prevention, which I wholeheartedly agree.
Yep.
But how we manage even an acute coronary, syndrome or anything. All of these drug-eluting stents, none of this existed in my residency days. So I feel like if you're not always learning, you are not going to be at the top of your profession.
Absolutely.
And for me, I think it was very early on. I'll give you just an example of a patient that just really sticks out in my mind. This was about a decade into my career. She had the typical range of chronic diseases: diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and we had her well controlled. I had done my medical school training at Harvard, and I stayed there at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and I felt incredibly well trained to manage these chronic diseases. And her numbers were extremely well controlled, but she went on to develop metastatic breast cancer. And her biggest wish was that she would be there for her daughter's graduation. Her daughter was the first generation to graduate in college in this country. And she did in a very frail state. And I couldn't help but ask myself, how can we alleviate so much human suffering? Like, how can we let this happen? And the commonality between these diseases ultimately is metabolic disease, right? And it stimulated for me a thought process of how can I take what I know about human physiology? And I had majored in biochemistry and biophysics in college. I worked for 2 years in a lab splicing messenger RNA. And I have such an obsession with the pathways in our body. And I had to ask myself, how can I take what I know, rethink how we deliver care, and go as far upstream as possible to how disease originates and help people stop and really reverse even changes at that most fundamental unit. And I've really dedicated my career to lifestyle medicine, and a lot of my research has been on finding early biomarkers of disease. We've done programs looking at how lifestyle interventions affect different disease outcomes. And the most upstream part of this is cellular health, getting our cells healthy. And that's what led me to hormesis, or the science of good stress. For me, this is the most powerful lever because there are over 30 trillion cells in our body. And our cells make up our tissue. They make up our organ systems. If our cells are healthy, we can alleviate so much of the symptoms that modern medicine really is not well suited to really resolve. We can prevent diseases that modern medicine or the current healthcare system isn't well designed to do. We can slow aging. We've done studies on how hormetic stress impacts our biological age. So for me, this is the most powerful lever.
Love that. And so, going along with that, what when we're looking at the future of medicine and longevity, what excites you most? I mean, we see the advent of, regenerative medicine and how that's blossoming. We see how we're looking at these hormetic stressors and how they can help with longevity, supplements that we can take that will help with, anti-aging and longevity.
Including a variety of peptides, including
definitely. I mean,
GLP agonists.
There's so many things at our fingertips now. What excites you the most about this?
Well, I'm first of all extremely excited by our capability to understand the aging process, right? We've known since, the 1990s that, this is from a Danish twin study, that about 25% of our longevity is based on genetics and 75% is in our control based on our habits or environment. But what we've learned really in the last decade, this was a Hallmark study in 2013 that said, hey, there are 9 Hallmark findings of processes at a cellular and molecular level that are leading to the aging process. And what is, to me, just incredible is this deep connection between our stress biology and our aging biology. Because every one of those 9 hallmarks, which are things like genomic instability, telomere attrition, loss of our nutrient sensing pathways, loss of proteostasis or protein balance, what good stress...
Mitochondrial instability.
Exactly. What good stress is doing is it is reversing, or I shouldn't say entirely reversing, but it is certainly slowing every one of these 9 hallmarks of aging. Right? There's this incredible overlap, which is what makes it so powerful. And while there's so many supplements that I think are going to add to our armament of the aging process, so many are being explored, for example, metformin being explored for its effect on the AMPK nutrient sensing pathway, or rapamycin on mTOR, or the mammalian targeted rapamycin pathway. And supplements are targeting one pathway. And when you are using a lifestyle-based approach through these good stressors, you are targeting all of the pathways. Right? It is so much more powerful, and our body knows what to do with good stress. So we don't have to worry about, did we get too much, too little? How do we dose it? Because when we take a lot of supplements, we're doing it on a chronic level, like we take it every day. We don't know if the impact of that is going to be as beneficial, or really how it's going to affect our physiology, versus when we do good stress in an intermittent way. Because this pattern of stress recovery, like spike in stress hormones and in stress resistant processes in our body, followed by recovery. It's in the recovery that we do the remodeling, the reconfiguring in our body. And so I feel like it's incredibly exciting to, first of all, understand what's happening in our body with the aging process. We have the tools now to better measure it, right? So like you mentioned, we can look at the rate of aging through epigenetics. We can look at biological age through epigenetics, and we're doing a lot of exploration and pilot studies on that. And we can now do interventions like for 3 months, try, a high intensity interval workout and then measure your rate of aging 3 months later, right? We have the ability to understand how the things that we do every day are impacting how we are going to, be 10, 20, 30 years from now.
So true. It's interesting. And again, we're highlighting the fact that what you're saying is, we look at these medicines and they do target one specific pathway, and how these 5 stressors that you discuss target all of the pathways. So look, even though we're trying to find ways of cheating the process, the idea is we already have the tools in front of us. You just need to implement them. Even so, we still will have listeners and users that will say, okay, give me some of the top supplements. You had mentioned that you drink your coffee with ferulic acid. I take something called urolithin A. What other supplements, people are still saying, all right, let's say I'm going to implement these things, but I want to go one step further. What supplements or foods do you swear by for resilience and well-being?
How I look at supplements is they're there precisely to do that. They're there to supplement what we simply just can't get enough of. In an ideal day, we would get 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight. We would get roughly about 30 grams of fiber, a little bit less if you're female, a little bit more if you're male a day. You want to get, an abundance of phytochemicals. And sometimes days go by where it's hard to do. You're both in healthcare, or all 3 of us are in healthcare. And there are days where, you may not get to eat a meal. Days go by, you didn't get your protein intake because you only have 3 minutes to grab something. So to me, that's where the role of supplements is. So, if you've gotten your protein that day, you may want to shift towards a supplement that day that has prebiotic fibers, or has some phytochemicals, that has some element of fruits and vegetables in the supplement, and vice versa. So you're complementing what you simply couldn't do through a food first approach. And then you also want to supplement the vitamins that we just don't get enough of typically in a diet, like vitamin D, because the only dietary sources are like sardines, cod liver oil, salmon. Milk is fortified, but an 8-ounce glass of milk is about 100 international units. It falls many-fold short of what we need. So, and certainly we don't want to be out for a prolonged amount of time in the sun without sunscreen. So I think there's a clear role for supplementation with vitamin D. Creatine is probably the absolute, most well-studied supplement. Close to 1,000 studies on creatine and how it builds cellular energy in the form of ATP. Historically, there was a ton of literature on creatine if you want to build muscle mass for people who work out a lot. Recently, there's also now growing evidence of its role for cognitive benefits. Studies of neurodegenerative disease have undergone total brain injury, and how it helps in those states. Helps after a night of, if you haven't slept well, how the following day, if you want to be more effective. The creatine is in a supplement form where it's studied at 5 milligrams of creatine monohydrate. That amount you just can't get through diet. Like you need 400 glasses of milk. So there's a role for supplementation for things that we simply just can't get, even when we are trying to just do our best getting a healthy diet and exercise.
I know this is a difficult question to ask, or to answer, I should say. But if our listeners had to take one thing from this entire podcast, what would you say it would be?
I would say is knowing that your body has an innate intrinsic ability to heal itself. And good stressors are regenerative medicine. They are regenerating your cells. They are getting at the root of what goes wrong when we develop symptoms of disease. And every one of us has the ability to prevent and slow and even reverse the diseases that are just rampant and will get worse if we don't make changes in our lives.
Tune in to watch more videos just like this one.
Would you rather, take a medication to stop the acid reflux and just, mask that symptom, or change your diet and lose weight and, do all the things that are harder?